never tried that before, and I was asking for an R6 Mark II at first, but it was unfortunately taken. And with the 15 to 35, was this a 2.8? I didn't really check. Yeah, it's a 2.8. So this lens I've also never tested. So let's go and have some fun now. We got like 3-4 hours to do that. So basically what was going on until now is just me setting up the camera so that the dials work the exact same way as the EOS R goes, like that. And I'm filming on Clog 3 for a while. Later I'll go on a photo walk and see how it is for photo, but for now I just wanted to have a couple of clips in Clog 3 just to test the dynamic range now, what the sky looks like, if it's blown out or something. I'm cracking the shutter now, it's at 2500 because I don't have any NDs or something like that. But yeah, let's see how this looks. In 4K, 23 frames per second, and yeah, with the R5. Let's just walk around. So now I have the stabilization turned on in the lens, and yeah, let's just test it for the wobbles now. I'm just walking around holding it with my hands, no tripods attached to it or anything. So that's what that would look like. And we got Justin here. Clips in 120 frames per second. In 4K I couldn't do it because you need the CF Express card. I only have an SD card because I use the EOS R, so I don't need the other ones. We're just going away from this noise a little bit right now. I don't know, is it necessary to film 4K vlogs? Huh? What do you think?
For vlogs, definitely. Yeah. I don't know. No, I'm very happy with 1080 120.
Yeah.
Like my A64 can.
That can do. Oh,
yeah,
right.
1080 120, and it's super old.
Yeah. The Sony and their specs. What can we do about that? I can do 120 frames per second in my EOS R. I never use it because it's in 720p, but that's not the reason why I don't use it. It's because it doesn't have autofocus.
Ah, so it doesn't have AF also?
No.
Oh my God.
70 to 200 would actually be perfect here because we have some sports. So let's try to get some shots of that. It is so fast, wow, it's crazy. The autofocus is also... Why don't you try it? Let me get your impressions. Just try taking some photos.
the
Oh,
IF is like really good.
Yeah, yeah.
Like it captures Kat, like, and she's so far away, right? Even Kara.
This is just insane.
Yeah, but
you
it's
can just
like,
point it and it finds.
Yeah, I
it
noticed it automatically found the eyes.
Yeah, and it finds it so fast. You just point and shoot.
Yeah.
This should be a point and shoot camera. What are they doing? Danke sehr.
Speicherkarte hast du?
Habe ich schon
Ja, habe ich schon.
Sehr gut.
Ja.
Okay. Danke.
Vielen Dank. Dankeschön.
Ciao.
Ciao. Ciao. God bless Canon.
So now that I have edited everything from that day, the photos and the clips, let's talk a little bit about what I find to be pros and cons when it comes to switching from an EOS R, for example, to an R5. Let's start off with the pros. Number one, it's autofocus. It was such a huge improvement and I really loved it. It was super fast, it could detect faces from so far away, and it could respond really fast as well, much faster than my EOS R can. Even though the autofocus of the R5 is not really the best that Canon can do because the R6 Mark II has an even better autofocusing system, it was still a huge improvement on my EOS R and I really loved that about it. The autofocus then combined with the 12 frames per second mechanical shutter in continuous shooting mode that I used it for sports made the camera even better in that scenario than my EOS R would have been, because first of all my EOS R would have probably missed a lot of shots because it couldn't focus on them, and second of all it would probably miss a lot of shots because it has slower frame rates, 5 frames per second continuous shooting. What you can do to compensate for the speed of the autofocus on the EOS R is use the 1-point autofocus instead of the face and eye tracking autofocus, and that would make it a lot faster, but then the problem is that you don't have the freedom to frame the picture as you want. So if you put the point in the center of the frame, then the subject will always have to be at the center of the frame, otherwise it won't be in focus. The second big thing was the 1080 120 frames per second, which on the EOS R I don't have, and to see how beautiful the clips were in slow motion, the B-roll that I shot there, like I really like that. It was a noticeable improvement that could make my vlogs a lot more interesting, I think, than the 60 frames per second, even though the 60 frames per second is okay in most cases. But unlike these two things, which have kind of workarounds, like on the first one you could use the spot autofocus instead of the face and eye tracking. On the second one you could use 60 frames per second for slow motion instead of 120 frames per second. The next thing that I was really looking forward to test were the 10-bit colors for video as well as the dynamic range. For both of those I have struggled with my EOS R because it can only record 8-bit footage, and that combined with the C-Log, which doesn't give you that much dynamic range, is kind of a bummer for video. First of all, C-Log is quite difficult to expose correctly because you have to go like 1 or 2 stops overexposed all the time, otherwise you will have a lot of noise in the shadows. But even when you manage that to avoid the noise in the shadows, then still the colors don't give you much room to play and they easily fall apart, and in the end you get not so pleasing looking footage. Moving on, some other improvements were, for example, the viewfinder. I didn't expect that, but I felt like it was much clearer, and when I checked the specs afterwards, that was confirmed. The R5's viewfinder has 5.76 million dots versus the 3.69 million dots on the EOS R, plus the R5's has a 120 frames per second refresh rate versus the 60 frames per second refresh rate of the EOS R. So with that, combined with the joystick, it was much easier to use the camera with the viewfinder. With the EOS R, I barely ever used the viewfinder. Now the R5 is generally an improved camera over the EOS R in pretty much everything, but there are some drawbacks. The first one that I noticed was that it was much more difficult to edit the clips afterwards. The 1080 120 frames per second was no problem at all for my computer, like I could really play it back in Premiere with no problems, but the vlogging clips were really impossible to play back, so I had to render them all before I could go through them and see what's up and do all the cuts and stuff. So yeah, it's definitely a drawback if you don't have the latest computer, which I don't, even though my computer is pretty powerful, to be honest. So there was one drawback, it makes you slower. And another one, which is the same, it makes you slower again, but I noticed that with Lightroom this time, when I was editing the photos in Lightroom Classic, it wasn't that smooth, the experience of moving back and forth. I guess because of the 45 megapixels, you get a lot of detail in the shots, but more detail also means more data, which is harder for the computer to process, and that's what made the whole process a lot slower. And I did notice that the photos were much better, and I could crop in much easier and still have a lot of details retained in the shot. I still don't think that is something that I would really like to use or like to have. I don't crop in all that much as that camera would allow, and I still think that it looks a bit weird when you crop so much into a photo. And now, having tried the EOS R, the RP, as well as the R5, I'm really looking forward to trying out the R6 and the R6 Mark II, because it could be that those cameras are on the sweet spot for me. Because when it comes to video, they could record in 10-bit, and when it comes to photos, they have smaller sensors, 20 and 24 megapixels, which means less data in the photos, which means faster processing speeds. So yeah, it could be that the R6 cameras are the sweet spot for me in the moment, but we'll see about that. So now we've come to the end of this video. Thank you very much for watching. Before you go, make sure to leave a comment down below and let me know about your experience or thoughts about the EOS R versus the R6 and R6 Mark II versus the R5. Hit the like button if you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss any videos like this, and I will see you in the next one.